I'm going to kick this off by being my pedantic self, because that's who I am, and that's why I'm loved at Rustici. So on the screen, there's this title that says, Ask the AI Panel of Experts. And this was actually a thing I thought a little bit about beforehand. And I would actually probably rephrase that as, Ask the panel of AI experts. And the difference being, when I started thinking about running this panel, I was like, well, should we have an AI here? Like, why are we talking to people? Like, is this the human in the loop moment? I don't know. And so there's this place where I was like, maybe we should have like a little Claude head sitting over there and he could answer questions. But I realized this morning that seemed kind of silly too, because, this is supposed to at least be, to a degree, about what us as people have found in working with AI. And so we have three folks here who have done a lot already with AI, even relatively new technology. These are early adopters. These are people that take a pragmatic approach to technology in general. So, getting their expertise on how they're working with AI, what they've seen already, is really what this is all about. So going to do a quick intro let them do a quick intro. We kind of stacked the deck a little bit here against Megan, but originally Stephen was still at Sands when we sent this invite, and he accepted. So he has since come on board at Rustici. So, that's all right. Megan will hold her own. I'm quite certain. So without further ado, Megan, Stephen, and Reed, if you guys want to introduce yourself real quick.
Sure. Thanks, Brian. Hey, everybody. I am Megan Torrance. I'm the CEO and founder at TorranceLearning, and we do really a full stack learning strategy and design and development service for the mostly workplace learning environment. And that's put me in an opportunity to not only on our team work with AI tools and start evaluating what works for us, start evaluating what works in the learning experience, and then begin working with our clients as AI transformations are happening in their organization, and that affects the learning space. I've also recently hosted the ATD intensive on AI back in July, which was super, super fun. Going to host the ATD intensive on data in October, and I'm working with ATD on a book on AI implementation for L&D professionals.
Hey everybody, my name is Stephen Kalnoske. As Brian mentioned, I am with Rustici, but I used to be with the Sands Institute and I'm very much a baby Rustician right now. I joined in July, but before that I was at the Sands Institute. I was a lead developer in innovation and AI, did a lot of our AI rollout, did a lot of product development around AI and training. And since July now I'm the principal engineer at Rustici working on AI.
Hello, everyone. My name is Reed McLean. You can see right below me, I'm a senior software developer, apparently at Rustici. I actually haven't heard my job title in a while. I've been at Rustici for a while, long enough. I'm not sure exactly how long. I worked on most of the products. I'm here mostly representing the generator dev team. We've been working on an application that uses language models to generate content. And so that's been a couple of years in development at this point. So I'm probably here to speak from mostly that perspective, but I'm happy to answer any content controller questions if you have them.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. So, our topic really is, what we would say is the transformative role of AI, as it relates to e-learning and kind of the unique challenges and opportunities it presents for specifically the training and compliance industry. So that's really what we're going to target here. So start off with the present. What is AI kind of in action right now? So, let's start with a look at what we're doing. Megan, from a design and development perspective, where are you seeing kind of the most significant impact of AI?
The big conversation right now is around generative AI, not the AI that we've had for decades, right? The behind the scenes, right? So when you talk to the average instructional designer or learning designer, and you talk about AI, they're thinking generative AI tools, right? So we're seeing a lot of activity in what I call impact zone 1 for L&D professionals, which is their own personal productivity. So lots and lots of use of Gen AI chatbots, whatever that might be, and some additional use in what I would think, right? Right. There's a lot of text-based use, and then right as we're joking in the chat here, right? Media use, especially with VO3 coming on, the opportunities for actually really high quality video production are just starting to present themselves, and then data analysis, which is still requires a fair amount of human support and supervision, but it does extend our capabilities, and I'll talk about that more tomorrow. We're also seeing some activity in the vendor space around role play chatbots or coaches that help sales professionals, that help leaders, that help customer service professionals really get a lot of that practice that is otherwise low quality or a real pain in the neck when we have to practice with other people. So kind of to your point about, talking to real people, why aren't we talking with AI? Sometimes that practice can be maybe not deeper, depends on the setup and the environment, but definitely something I can spin up anytime, anywhere, repeatedly, and get some good feedback.
Right. So a lot faster to introduce and probably cheaper. You're not talking about simulations and stuff. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Stephen and Reed, from the perspectives of e-learning standards specifically, what's a surprising way AI is changing kind of the back end of corporate training? Maybe Stephen, this is definitely in what you've seen in your history.
Yeah, a lot of times, especially in the compliance space, you see all these vendors now baking AI into their learning management tools or learning experience platforms. And through the years of wandering the dev learn halls, everything has just been like just-in-time training. Like, this dream that we can get training out to people, just the amount of training that they need at the right times. And I see AI now, especially in all these platforms, really starting to deliver on that, where it was kind of like, a pipe dream before, but now it's actually in practicality driving down the corporate cost of training using these systems, where, a lot of times people would come in and they'd have all this training, compliance training, and they just want to give it HR gets its own little training. And then, this little section gets their own slice of training. But if you do that enough, it just almost becomes easier. Like everybody gets all the training. But now with all these AI tools, you can actually really start to slice in an automated and smart way to actually give just the amount of training that people need. And it's driving down the corporate cost of training. Training is expensive for people. And so you see a lot of vendors bake that into their value proposition. We can actually sell you less training more effectively.
Got it. Cool. Reed, anything to add? You're not as close to probably this area as others are.
Yeah, I'm not super familiar with the content production side. I've definitely seen a lot of the the marketing tools around using generative AI to make training content, which is really interesting. I've actually been surprised at some of the work that Steven's done since he came on board. A lot of internal knowledge support, not specific to the e-learning industry or corporate training, but it's been cool. He's been talking about feeding some video content into Generator and using that to distribute information internally, and that's been really cool to see. I'm excited to see where that goes.
Yeah. So that kind of leads into the next question, which is, can each of you share a specific project or application where AI has been used to create a more customized or efficient training experience? And maybe I'll start with you, Reed. How does Generator, what's the intent of Generator for that purpose?
Yeah, a lot of it is, if you're familiar with the product pitch, people in the public, it's looking at your content and generating metadata about it. So if you've got a huge content library, you can more easily identify it, and then we can help you describe it. But I bet Stephen and Megan, being closer to the training side of things, further from, I focus more on the back end software side, have a little more interesting examples.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing that Generator, specifically for this purpose is definitely the search thing, and that's a thing that I don't know that we've exposed a lot. We're waiting for kind of some more use cases around that, but it's kind of quite powerful. So yeah, Stephen and Megan, same question.
Stephen, you want to go first this time?
Sure. Okay. Yeah. So a while back, I worked on a really cool product called TutorBot, and it's basically exactly how it sounds. It was an AI tutor that was given to students, and these students were kind of like not in their offices or anything like that. It was a very intense, like 7-day cybersecurity training course, and the purpose of that was basically they could, when you're in a 7-day on-site thing, if you fall behind like on day 1 or day 2, like by day 6 or day 7, you're sunk. There's just no catching up in that kind of environment. So we created this thing called TutorBot that we're kind of demoing to students, where they could basically take a test on what they learned that day and how much they remember and how their skills were transferring. And it would identify where their weak points were. And so focusing just on those weak points, we could actually redeliver the training in those bite-sized parts to catch them up or to really upskill them so that, by day 2, 3, 4, they were very successful in getting through the course.
Oh, I love that so much. What I also love about that, Stephen, is that they're able to interact with the tutor bot off hours.
Yes.
Right? When your facilitators need to go home and sleep.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a startup here in Ann Arbor that is, they have basically an AI professor, right? So you dump all your material in. It's like your AI, maybe the professor, but the teaching assistant. You dump all your material in, and it can be there to answer questions. And as one of them said, they found that the primary activity on their tutor was between 11 p.m. and 3 a.m. And the faculty's like, yeah, I'm not available then. So
those are the golden cramming hours I remember from college, right?
Exactly, right. So I love applications like that, and I think that's really powerful, both from a tutoring perspective as well as a moment of need. I get, or on the job transfer. I get out onto the job and I need support, and I can't call my instructor. I can pull up a coaching bot. We've been doing some work lately. We had a Demo Fest project at eLearning last year and have been advancing that tool where we're providing, instead of a multiple choice question, right, which is our standard way because that's how Scorm and XAPI score data, right? And that's what's easy to build. But life isn't multiple choice, right? Very rarely am I interacting with somebody and hovering behind their head, I see 3 or 4 choices, one of which has to be the right answer in this situation, right? So we're giving learners a big old empty text box or speech to text box. And then instead of interacting with them opposite them, right, like a tutor would or a role play partner, we're actually giving them feedback on what they did, and then they have the opportunity to try again, or keep moving on in that interaction. And we're finding it's really, really powerful as far as generating that retrieval practice, right? I have to pull from my memory, what am I supposed to do in this instance? And then I'm not getting yay you or yes, you got it right. I'm getting feedback, what was right, what wasn't right, and an opportunity to try again. And it's hard work. Learning ought to be, in some cases, hard work. It's really fantastic to see how excited people are about this.
Yeah,
And Megan, you raised a really good point, Megan, about everything before AI. So much of the training was like, if you build something in Captivate, it had to be like multiple choice quiz. Otherwise, how would you grade it and all that kind of stuff. And especially with when we built TutorBot, multiple choice was one of the things. But a lot of times, like you said, you put an empty text box and you just ask them to explain this concept, and then from their answer, like it ceased to be a binary, like, okay, you got that right or you got that wrong. You could say, oh, you're close, you just missed this little nuanced thing, or you're understanding this. It opened up a whole area of grading and feedback, like you said, around that.
Yeah, I like those answers. That reminds me of actually one of the panels that I saw when I was at ITSEC a couple of years ago. I can't believe it's been a couple of years, but there was a professor at Vanderbilt who was running a very early days course, leveraging foundation models. And what, all at that time, everybody was talking about cheating. Oh, you can cheat and you can have it write your essay and all of this. And he flipped it on its head, and he basically said, no, my students must use AI. He was requiring them to use it. And what was turned in was actually, he wanted to see how they were prompting it. He wanted to see the chat session that occurred. And he felt that was, his students were learning much more because they were going far deeper into areas that they wanted to explore themselves, where their interest was, like what questions they had. And he could see that from the transcript that they had from, using a chat bot. And I like, that was mind blowing back then, where he wasn't so concerned about them cheating, but he was leaning into like, no, you must use this thing. And I think that aligns well with what you guys were just saying. So I'm going to kind of move us forward here a little bit. And, we've been talking about the present. There's not that much past, even though I'm kind of just commenting on something. But, let's talk about the future. Where are we heading? So, looking ahead, what do you believe is kind of the most important trend for AI in our industry, for the e-learning, for the training space, kind of over the next 3 to 5 years? So Reed, kind of from your perspective of how the tech is being built, what do you see as the next frontier? Where, maybe where does Generator go? Maybe where does our engineering staff go? You can tell me what I'm supposed to be managing here, but let me know what's up.
Yeah, hopefully none of this is too surprising to you as but I think a really interesting use of LLMs that has been challenging on Generator is using language models in non-interactive contexts, because a lot of them are built for this sort of chat back and forth interface we've been talking about. And that might be due to a lot of circumstances, but I think using them as a way to design functions with fuzzy rules and fuzzy inputs, and sometimes trying to get whatever the opposite of fuzzy outputs is, like very discrete values. Like we're trying to use that for Generator a little bit in parsing stuff in the browser, like taking this web page, this DOM that could come from any e-learning course, and trying to get concrete information out of it is really interesting and actually pretty challenging with the models we've been engaging with, at least, because a lot of them are built around this chat interface, but we're trying to design them for Generator, which uses these asynchronous jobs where you just start it up, let it go, and it comes back with some words. And that's, I think, going to be really interesting when you've got problems with not a strict set of parameters, right? It's not pass in a 3, get a 9. It's pass in a 20,000 character string and get back a 500 character string. Like you can't do that with non-machine learning like functions, like traditional programming. So from what I've seen and from what I've been Googling as we try to solve these problems aren't really solved, which makes me think that's where some stuff is going to be interesting in the next few years.
Got it. Cool. Megan, and how do you see it impacting the actual learner experience? There's this thing that I've been talking with folks here a lot about, of like, we have the Rustici engine player in front of so many learners, and there's something interesting there, how we can leverage these tools. Maybe that's part of it, but I'm curious how you see it impacting the actual learner experience.
We have an opportunity to personalize, and we this is the theme we talked about a minute ago, right? Personalization is key, right? We get personalization in our social media lives. We get personalization in our human lives. We get personalization when we talk to our managers. Why do we then come to an LMS and take the same course that 3,500 other people took? And it doesn't matter if I am an expert. It doesn't matter if I am a novice. It doesn't matter if I've just screwed this thing up 7 times in a row on the job, or never do this particular task, right? We all have to take the same course. And so the opportunity to personalize is, I think, some of the most interesting opportunity for us, and a really effective opportunity, because we start tapping in not only to what Stephen was talking about from an efficiency perspective, but also from an adult learning perspective, right? Being able to connect into what you actually need, what you're actually going to apply. when you actually need to apply it. So I feel like we're in this opportunity to move away from the everybody gets the same e-learning course to everybody gets the support they need when they need it. And that's really, really exciting. I think the interesting challenge for organizations will be how do we make sure everybody's getting the consistent story and the same framework so that we can talk to each other and have reasonable expectations of the skill sets of a person from job to job to job. So I think there's some really interesting things that we'll get an opportunity to design around for in the next maybe 3 to 5 years.
Yeah,
And
no,
yes,
that's
I know there's a whole bunch of people out there saying it's here now. Yes, it is here now, but from an actual like hitting the road and being productive and useful at scale, still a bit out.
wide adoption, right? Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely pockets of it. And it does, it seems like, I've been in this industry for about 12 years. And it every time I go and I talk to someone at a conference or we're on an XAPI call, and it's like the dream of this is like, oh, well, if we just had this data, it would enable us to do these things. So kind of what you're getting at is like, this is the next tool that's needed to get us from just having the data and having micro learning, having remote, like mobile on-site training, to now how do we target that to individuals? It's an interesting thing. And Stephen, I was going to ask you, and it's somewhat related, because there is this kind of fuzzy area where we have this notion of learning and we have this notion of training for compliance. How do we keep the lawyers off our back? So Stephen, what does it mean for the compliance professional who needs to ensure, accuracy and defensibility? Like, how do we get there with these tools that are, they're fuzzy?
They're fuzzy in kind of like their outputs, and they're fuzzy in kind of like the data they produce. And Megan, in her list of things at the beginning of what AI is doing really well, she mentioned the data we have. The data part is kind of like almost there, or not quite there yet. And everything that you say about customization and personalization really comes down to we have the ability to collect all this data about interactions and people, and now it's kind of like it's going to sit somewhere. What do we do with it, and how do we get it into all these courses that need to be customized and personalized? And XAPI, I think, is a great answer. You can't have XAPI without AI in it, literally. But just handling all this data and kind of like a defensibility around what you're putting into the AI and what it's producing is actually like real. In the compliance space, that's actually pretty easy, because when you're selling compliance courses, you don't have like this super bespoke secret sauce. Like you can Google how not to get phishing training and stuff like that. It's all about more like now it's the presentation of how you deliver those courses, and how you engage people into those courses for courses that frankly they probably don't want to take. But again, it's data. How do we handle all this fire hose of data now?
Yeah, interesting. The again, going back a little bit to you, Megan. So, obviously all of this is going to be impactful on the instructional designer. So, how do you see the role of the instructional designer changing? I'm not going to go so far as to say we're not going to need them, because you can take a PDF online and you can run it through Generator and it's going to give you some interesting things about it. But that's very different from a person who is trained in the art of creating actual learning. There's a big difference there. But how do you see that changing?
Well, I think AI tools are already and will continue to be like a force multiplier for your average instructional designer, right? They are incredibly powerful. Dr. Filippo Hardman's doing all sorts of research, right, that many of us are reading, and may have a really interesting time if we're not reading. Like, totally look up her stuff. But what we're seeing is that AI tools have the ability to help an instructional designer move deeper and further and faster, and in some cases more creatively, and with greater structure. The ID's role in that space is to be the champion for the process, to be the champion and the connector with the subject matter expert and the business sponsor, and really very connected there, right? So the ID becomes curator, reviewer, consultant, partner in performance improvement, partner in designing solutions that really make sense, and less bogged down with writing and media construction and writing those gosh darn multiple choice questions that are a pain in the neck to write. So there's definitely a role here, and we were talking about data, right? Part of the ID's role is to help make sure that the knowledge base, right, that data that we're all sourcing from is accurate and current and up to date. So there's a big piece here. Right now, our IDs are also the champions of adult learning theory and the learning sciences and how this works. We will see, I am sure of it, the rise of tools that have all of those processes embedded in them, and with internal recursive accuracy checkers and quality controls and whatnot. And we may find then the ability to generate learning content being much more widely dispersed within the organization. And then the ID's role or the learning team's role is to be a champion for really great design, not necessarily a bottleneck. And sometimes we're a bottleneck. There's only so much we can do in an organization.
Yeah, I like that answer. It's definitely a thing, even on the engineering side, where I've been reading, the more skeptical side of this, or not all developers are going to lose their job, next year, is the framing of it as 70% of the work that a developer does is not writing code. If 30% is probably actually high. It's gathering technical requirements, understanding the business logic, understanding how to support this thing and run it long term, and best practices and all of that. So it sounds very similar to, like you're saying with the learning sciences. So, it's definitely interesting. Reed, one of the things I know you've had to learn quite a bit about all of these subjects, and the other two can chime in here too, but what new skill sets do you think will be essential for professionals, not just developers, but in the e-learning and training compliance fields, to successfully leverage AI? I think there's a lot of people out there that are still like, oh, I don't know what to do. I've downloaded this on my phone. I have a good time when I'm, just messing around, but how do I apply that to my actual professional role?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is these questions aren't dissimilar to however many years ago when Google first came around. Like, how do you successfully search the web for information, right? It's about understanding the limitations of the tools and being able to work with those. And, just like, in 2005, you couldn't just Google something and copy the first thing you see. Same thing with AI and language models, right? It's going to be about understanding the limitations of the tools and how to work with them. I think it's also going to be actually pretty role specific. Like at Rustici, we're starting to roll out some AI development tools as part of our internal tool chain, and that's been its own learning curve. Like, I'm a senior software developer, but in some ways the AI stuff has been helpful. In some ways, it's another tool to learn. It's a totally different workflow in some ways. So I think it's going to be a lot like Megan was talking about with some of the ID stuff. Like, I don't know how to assign any instructions. I think a lot of it is going to be the specific tooling that develops around a bunch of role specific kind of stuff. I don't know. Yeah.
Cool. Stephen, Megan, thoughts?
I think a lot of this is, David in the chat said prompting, and that's a really big thing. I think it's like we're using a lot of terms for this new behavior in using AI that kind of borrow from old terms, like, prompt engineering or searching. AI search is a lot different than, the search that came before it when we were on Google. One of my favorite kind of metrics that OpenAI has put out is when they had just like the OpenAI prompt box, what do you want to do? People would write on average a 26-word prompt to describe what they're trying to learn or what they're trying to do, and giving wonderful context to the AI of what this output should be. And then they introduced, searching the web. And if you could click a little button in OpenAI's ChatGPT to search the web, immediately those 26 words went down to an average of 4 words. People were defaulting, oh, I'm searching the web, let me put in like, my Boolean, Google search kind of thing. And it was actually sabotaging the usage of ChatGPT by like, implementing like this old paradigm of searching the web. And so, now they took it out and they just do it automatically when they think, it's needed. But trying to like learn these new behaviors using the old kind of vocabulary that AI is not really attuned for.
So I think what Stephen's really pointing to too is overall one of the skill sets that our organizations need is not just AI literacy, but AI proficiency, right? What do I do? How do they work? What should I expect for them? What should I not do in these tools? And how do I get the most out of them? And that's a huge role for the L&D team in an organization. And often, especially the early AI literacy piece and the what not to do piece also is an opportunity to partner with the compliance team, because the compliance team in the organization, they know how to get stuff out to everyone and make sure everybody does it. Okay? Proficiency then gets into like, how do I use these tools? And then, I look at AI fluency, and Marcus Bernhardt talks a lot about this as well, in terms of an organization that has a self-sustaining capability around AI. That's not just how to, but how do we, and what could we do, and that experimentation, that learning culture side of things. And I think that's really, really exciting and super important. Some of the questions coming in, and there's some great questions coming in. Some of these questions are like, well, how do I convince leaders of this? And how do I get the ability to do that? And a part of that comes in that organizational AI capability. From a learning perspective, as far as new skills, if you talk to the average learning experience designer, they don't want to be an order taker. I mean, you say the word order taker, or can you make me and they just start bristling, right? Because they don't want to be like, and so there's this tension, right? Which means as we have this, right, like I said, this force multiplier, this new tool that can help me do fantastic things, it frees me up to be a partner, a business consultant, to focus on performance improvement, which means I need to level up my skills as a learning designer in being a trusted advisor, consulting the business, asking the right questions, understanding what the business is and how it makes money in a much more in-depth way so that I can be that strong partner. And so it's not simply that you get tools that automate certain aspects of your role and poof, you're a performance consultant. There's a skill set shift there that needs to happen.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, and Reed alluded to this earlier. One of the things that we're trying to do at Rustici is try to, how do we operationalize using AI, particularly on the development side. We cheated a little. We hired a Stephen who'd already been doing this for 2 years, but that's, one of the things that I've already learned from him, and we've already been passing it on to our team is, how to leverage which foundation model for certain types of requests. How do you interact with this, an IDE tool that the developers use to get the most out of, what the AI is producing. How do you know when to make sure to tell it, no, don't do that because it gave you, an answer that wasn't great. All of that is definitely a thing that is becoming the thing that we have to learn. So I'm going to move us forward here to some practical and ethical considerations. And we already had a question here, but I wanted to pull out one that I saw from David in particular, and this hits to these points, which is, he says, I have clients that are hypersensitive to data privatization and AI accuracy. How can we convince our stakeholders or potential clients that they can be more confident in using AI as a tool? And this is one that I know that Stephen will have strong opinions on because he's done a lot of this type of stuff because of the operationalization and the enablement. So Stephen, what are your thoughts there? Every
one of these tools, like, AI tools, carries an amount of risk on it. And in shipping AI and developing AI, you always have to be cognizant about, like, the risk of it being wrong, the risk of it being exploited, the risk of, all these legal, especially now global legal ramifications of using this stuff. Is it worth it? And I think it's convincing stakeholders that they can be more confident. There's, developing a really good framework of benefit and risk. There's a lot of things, like the AI part of this is easy. I think, developing an AI chatbot based on your documents in your corporation, super easy. Deploying that to internal or even, external users, that's the super hard part that's really getting figured out. Just an example, like, in terms of, like, an HR bot at your company. There's a lot of things, again, HR bot, just put in your employee handbook. People can ask questions about your employee policies, easy. But if someone types in, like, help, my boss is bullying me or something like that, there are legal implications of that. Like, that has to be logged, that has to be actually reported up. So you have to build that kind of thing in. But if someone else comes in and says, like, hey, I'm pregnant, what are the, the maternity leave policies of that? Like, that can never be logged. That can never be, like, so balancing all this kind of stuff, legal and ethical frameworks around using AI, both internally and externally, is the super hard part, I think, of developing and deploying these things.
Got it. I was going to ask Reed, where's my question here? From the perspective of a company that builds tools, and and you've been on conversations with prospects around Generator, what are the biggest hurdles you've seen customers face when trying to implement an AI solution? Is it technical? Is it data related? Is it something else? Is it procurement? Where do you think the hurdles are coming from?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it has been around, like, data, keeping the data in-house. Basically, there's been some like sales discussions around making sure that they can run it on their end, because they're going to put all of their important data in this product, and then they're asking questions about how does the model you're talking with store data. A lot of large language model providers have, like, a professional mode or whatever they call it, where they don't use the incoming data to train their own models. Obviously, that's critical when you're dealing with important information. But the technically most interesting part, and by most interesting, I mean usually very frustrating, is how to test this stuff. I was talking earlier around, like, fuzzy inputs and outputs, or fuzzy inputs and discrete outputs. If your outputs are also fuzzy, like, how do you, for example, in Generator, if I give it a PDF, how do I assess the quality of the summary? We've done some internal attempts at rubrics about what that would look like. It needs to be this many sentences, and, like, there's some element of reader qualitative analysis. But when you're working with, like, a black box with whatever the latest number of parameters, 4 billion little knobs inside that you can't read or turn, and also no one knows what the knobs do, it's super difficult to be confident that the inputs you're testing are representative of the inputs that will happen in production. A lot more different than, say, a function that takes 10 numbers. That's a discrete matrix that you can test. You can't really test every possible string. So I think both the technical feasibility of that kind of testing, and also just the human factor of feeling comfortable with that. I think, like, some of these questions reflect that, of how can I trust the output? It's hard to get a statistically confident measure of reliability, I guess. So from what I've seen, that's been one of the more interesting challenges, and we've been having that for a couple of years working on Generator.
Yeah, I'll toss that to Megan a little bit, because I know she's been doing some stuff around trust and accuracy and, defensibility of instructional content and those types of things. So, Megan, do you want to weigh in on that? There are a lot of these questions do kind of boil down to, how do I trust this thing that I have to trust?
Yeah, and it's similar to questions we've had before we were using AI tools for some of this, right? How do I keep data private? How do I make sure that I trust that whatever comes out of the instructional design team is accurate, right? Or whatever comes out as learning content is accurate. So our historic solutions to that, until Reed and Stephen and friends, figure out automated solutions. Our historic solutions to that has been to have a human in the loop and subject matter experts and lawyers. And if this comes out sounding funny, you might want to check it. And that's a short-term answer. I don't think that'll be our answer for everybody and for all time. But for now, a lot of that is short-term and gets to that AI literacy, right? What should your expectations of your tools be? And that'll be different at every organization, right? What are your expectations? We even at Torrance Learning, we have a suite of GPTs that do a variety of things, and we name them based on our expectations of their capabilities. So we have an intern. You ought to check the intern's work pretty carefully, right? We have a partner that you can expect is like a colleague, right, in its capabilities. Do I check my colleague's work? It depends on whether or not it's high stakes, right? And then I have an advisor, and our advisors are very tightly wrapped, and we have high expectations of our advisors that they know, I'm making air quotes, know more than we do. And so we're signaling to our team what their expectations should be. Whenever I encounter, though, a leader who is concerned about privacy and accuracy, I want to dig into that a little bit because they may not be wrong. Right? Just because they're concerned about it doesn't mean they're wrong. And just because they're slow to adopt doesn't mean that that's a maladaptive approach given their situation. And so we're often looking, and heck, we did this on it in the XAPI cohort in 2015, where, some teams were like, wow, we work in I remember there was a team that was, that Carla Torgerson led that was working at a hospital. And you know what? They didn't collect data on learning that had anything to do with patient care. Their first examples was time management. They started simple. And they built trust and capability, and the team built skills and capability before moving on to more challenging topics.
Yeah. Cool. I want to go to another audience question. I think I can actually just skip us ahead because that was the next thing that we were going to do. But Jacqueline's question is definitely interesting. Again, from my ITSEC experience a couple of years ago, and it is specifically around Department of Defense for those of you that are not familiar with that conference. And so it's pretty much very large, heavy military presence there. One of the things that I took away from that was that they have some like 10-step, it is the military, they have like this 10-step process where they want to see this thing working, and then they want to validate it and do all of these things, levels of trust. And again, that's the key there. But the question here is in terms of military training. So we're talking pretty high stakes, I imagine. Where a lot of governments are just allowing the use of AI. How long would it take to train a tutor bot to the point where you can trust it to interact with, for example, aircrew students? Now, when aircrew students, I'm not sure if we're talking about like on the ground or we're talking about pilots or whatnot. But Stephen, what is your thought on that?
Yeah, it kind of depends on the stakes of what you're training for. Like, if you're training them on, go around maneuvers, or I'm assuming like, these are pilots or whatever like that. I used to work for the FAA, so that's kind of like my world in there too. But like, there's low stakes training, there's high stakes training. And so like, if you, it's not really about training the model. It's how much risk you want to take in terms of like, is that training going to be right to the point where like there's a little bit of doubt in what your AI is producing. If there's very little doubt about what your AI is producing, then go ahead. But if there's a lot of doubt and it's also like a high stakes thing, like, flying a mission, maybe AI is not the choice for that.
Yeah. And that reminded me of another thing that I was thinking about, which is, one of the things that I think we've seen in particular with not just LTG internally, but also some of our customers. We were talking about training the models and stuff. I think there has been a little bit of a knee-jerk reaction, kind of like the avoid the cheating thing earlier, but the knee-jerk reaction in the last year or so, and Steve and I have already had a conversation about this, which is that, oh no, we can't train the model at all. We can't make sure any of our IP is going into this model because it could be training something else. And I understand that, but it's also, I feel like this new knee-jerk reaction is a little bit throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It's like we have this powerful thing, but what you're telling me is right off the bat, I'm going to chop it at the knees. So I think that'll be a thing that will come back around as people get more trust, as people get more comfortable, as the tools develop to kind of vet these things. So I think that's an interesting reaction. Those are great answers. I do, paying attention to my clock here, I'm going to move us forward again. So this is going to kind of be, lightning round at the end. First, I wanted to say, make sure to check out our other sessions. We got one coming up. You heard Rustici Generator mentioned a couple of times, a thing that Reed is heavily involved in building and making successful. But we're going to have Elizabeth and Caleb talking about it and how it can be integrated. We do have an XAPI and AI coming up from Elliot. And then Artie, the autonomous assembler who cared. Andy Johnson always presents at Rustici Gathering, and his sessions are some of the best. So make sure you check that out. I think there's a metadata angle there. And then tomorrow, Megan's session, again, XAPI and learning analytics with AI. Be sure to check that out. So we got just a couple minutes. Final thoughts. What do you got? Reed, what do you got?
Oh, I don't think I have anything on the spot. I feel bad. Thanks, Megan and Stephen. I really enjoyed hearing your input. I don't get a lot of learner-facing stuff in my role. I'm usually building the tools for people who build the tools for the learners. And so I really appreciated hearing both of your insights, but I'm afraid I don't have any pocket wisdom to share.
No vibes for us. All right, that's fine.
Well, Reed, we on the learning design side appreciate all of the deep work that you and teams like you do, because it's not just all Gen AI, and that's, I think, something that that learning designers with all sorts of fancy new tools might overlook sometimes.
Cool, Stephen.
Use AI for what AI is good at. There's a lot of, I think, over reliance or kind of like shuffling AI into things that you can do without AI. So be judicious in your use of it.
Got it. Interesting. Yeah, I think there's a lot of things around cost that is showing up as well. I think that's one of the nervous points that a lot of businesses are saying, okay, we've got all these tools and we're seeing some efficiencies, but how do we make sure that they fit in our budget, right? That's a thing that we've been concerned about. All right. I did not expect that to go quite so fast, so that's okay. I think for me, the key takeaways here are, start small, use something, go out there and find a tool. There are still a number of them that are free and available, and start playing with it. Start playing with it in, your personal life and your professional life. I will confess to say that the outline for this panel, this is the first time I've done a panel. I sat down in front of my computer and I opened a Google Doc and I said, okay, I got to start figuring something out. Maybe I should build an outline. And then I'm like, what am I doing here? I got this Gemini tool off to the side. And so I went over to Gemini and I said, I've got to run a panel on AI and how it works with the e-learning industry and all of that. And then, 30 seconds later, it was like, bam, here's an entire outline. And so then I put in there, I was like, oh, well, here are the 3 panelists that are going to be on this. And, I think I put in the company names or something like that. And then, of course, knew all about all of you guys. I'm sorry. There's no privacy left here. But and so it said, you should ask Stephen these questions because he worked at SANS. And you should ask Megan these questions because she works with instructional designers. And I was like, great. And then I said, okay, well, it's got to fit in 50 minutes. And so then it went through and it put in times and all of that. And so absolutely leverage it for where you can get your work done, especially if it's low stakes. Make sure that you understand how and when to trust these things, and keep an eye out because this is going to change things. I'm kind of, I think, in the middle of the road on skeptical versus not skeptical. I don't believe that it's going to entirely make all of us unemployed tomorrow. But it is absolutely going to impact all of our work and how we can do it. And I think these guys did a great job of sharing with, some things about how it could impact both the L&D industry and everyone's professional roles. So I appreciate it. Yeah, check out the survey. There's been some things in chat. If we didn't get to your question, we'll try to get one or more of the opinions of these panelists to you. And I look forward to seeing everyone at the rest of the RTG session. So Stephen, Reed, Megan, thanks a lot. Appreciate it. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thanks, folks.
Thanks, everybody. See ya. Enjoy.